Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Substack Live at the Sustainable Media Center. My name is Emma Lemke, and I serve as the Director of Gen Z Advocacy for SMC. And I'm so honored to be joining conversation today with an SMC Gen Z board member, Imre Huss. A little bit more about Imre. He's a fervent democracy reform advocate and incoming Jefferson and Eccles Scholar at UVA. Wahoo wah, big fan. And there is so much to say about him and his work, but what we're going to do is we're going to dive into all of that during today's conversation. So thank you so much for joining us for this super important dialogue.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, for today's chat, there is a lot that I really want to unpack and dive into, especially as it relates to your work at that intersection of democracy reform and youth civic engagement. But before we dive deeper, let's allow listeners to kind of get to know you a little bit better, beyond just the introductory remarks. So, start off kind of by walking listeners through who you are, where you are in the world right now, and how you kind of found yourself in this advocacy position that you are today.
Yeah, so I'm Imre, as you said. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm currently a high school senior. I'm incoming into college. But I think a really important part of my background is my familial one. My mother is from Poland, and she left Poland as a young person, as a young advocate against the authoritarian regime there. So that kind of that idea that you are able to reform things, that you're able to advocate for yourself, is kind of in my blood, I would
Mhm.
say. But my valuing of democracy, I think, has been something that's always existed in my life, and I've really cared about my community as well. And so I think in interacting with media as I've grown, as I've read stories about the decline, both in Poland and in the US, of democracy, and I've actually seen, voter disengagement and uh, problems with elected government in my local municipality. A lot of my work winds up being local. I've kind of wanted to take action, and so I've been driven by this almost ancestral
Mhm.
motivation to reform and change, and I feel like in the community that I'm in both in Poland and the U.S., I've been able to see the opportunity to advocate for change.
Oh, that's fascinating. Do you think, well, okay, so much to unpack there. One, I think it's phenomenal that you kind of tap into that familial history. I think that not only probably has sparked your interest, but it keeps that flame burning, having that kind of long-lasting legacy.
Yeah.
Um, how do you kind of not commute back, but how do you kind of continue to engage with that community over in Poland to continue to do kind of some work over there? Talk us through that.
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time in Poland. I'm a Polish citizen. And when I was growing up, I spent my summers there.
Mhm.
I've been involved with like a lot of Polonia, it's called, like Polish American cultural work, but I also did some work in my sophomore and junior years of high school, doing some social media work for uh, Poles Abroad for Democracy, because at the time there were problems in Poland with the Constitutional Court being disbanded, and there were massive scandals with the Constitution being rewritten. And so I haven't been as engaged recently because I've been really focused on the U.S. as we deal with a lot of challenges to our democracy, to our civic systems. But I did, in my earlier years of high school, try to have that engagement.
I would also like everyone to note he's saying his earlier years of high school. He's still in high school. This is remarkable and just honestly so inspiring. So I'm curious. Obviously, you are having this conversation in the container that is SMC, and Sustainable Media Center talks a lot about young people and young people online. So Gen Z specifically spends huge amounts of time online. Do you think our generation, and I know like some great activists kind of say Gen Z 1.0, Gen Z 2.0, so technically I think I'd be 1.0, you'd be 2.0.
Yeah.
Do you think that both groups of Gen Z were becoming more civically engaged or misinformed? And kind of talk us through what might worry you the most about social media's impact on democracy, and then also kind of what might excite you the most, because
Yeah.
obviously there are two sides of the coin.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about that, because I do think I've seen in my peers and myself that there's really this idea that social media can be used for good, right? And maybe, a broad concept of social media, but like the digital era that we're in, where we can reach so many people, right?
Hmm.
And we can have a constant discourse in every community in the US, right? on these online platforms. And I think we've grown up in that, right? That is like what, at least for me, my entire life, there's been pretty much in the background this growing trend to engaging online, which I think really allows for powerful grassroots movements. It allows for people who don't have the capital resources to make a significant difference. And I think that's deeply exciting.
Yeah.
I think I've tapped into that a little bit in some of the projects I've worked on, but I'm really concerned with how social media has kind of overtaken civic life
Hmm.
in our country, and also just generally social life of a lot of teenagers. Um, and I think there's a little bit of a trend against that right now, right?
Hmm.
Where people are realizing that I don't want to spend a bunch of time on my phone. I don't want to be watching, AI generated slop.
Yeah.
But I think when you talk about Gen Z versus other generations, we've lived in this digital ecosystem. And so for us, we remember a lot of the positive things about it, right? The connection, the like in times of COVID, right? The ability to still
Mhm.
be in a community. And so we still kind of view it in this in slightly positive lens, but I
Hmm.
think when you have the level of misinformation, disinformation, when you have the loss of traditional, third spaces in a lot of young
Yeah.
people's lives, it really presents a danger to having a society that is well informed. And also, I know I'm kind of droning on here a little bit, but I think when we look at historically again, Gen Z versus other generations, we see such a diversification of media sources, right? And I think
Mhm.
in some ways it's a very positive thing. You get a lot more perspectives, but it also means that we have less of a shared baseline. And
Yep.
when
Yep.
I talk to my parents and grandparents and neighbors, right, who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they watched a couple of TV channels, a couple of news channels. These
Yep.
were the common sources of information. And while it's great that we can go on YouTube and Netflix and TikTok and we can get so many different sources of media and of information, it also we lose that shared thread. And I think as a society, we need to figure out how to regain that while keeping some of those positive aspects of these digital platforms.
100%. By the time that this is, published, I think that a piece of mine will have come out that's all about like alternative realities and this era of alternative truths, which
Yeah,
obviously like Kellyanne Conway talked about, but I think it expands more broadly into this ecosystem that we find ourselves within, which is exactly how you described it, which is, the inability to have this shared baseline kind of truth. Like it's very hard when you are shoved into, as a user, echo chambers that are going to reaffirm your kind of cognitive bias and are going to say, like, oh,
yeah,
I sense she's conservative. Let's give her a ton of conservative media outlets. And you do have access in theory to this diverse array of sources and of
yeah.
different biases, but you're getting shoved into the one that they think is going to keep you engaged and maximize your engagement for as long as possible. So there has to be, I think, a work not only to diversify one's own diet in terms of what they consume, but also to your point in figuring out as a society kind of how can we get back to a point where we have that baseline? Because if we don't have a baseline, shared baseline of truth, how can we be able to act upon that? How can we create good policy? And then how can we, uplift democracies?
Exactly. And if I can add one more thing onto that, I think we think about this digital era, right, as one with so many different stakeholders. Like
Mhm.
we don't have the legacy media having such an important footprint. But what we don't realize is that the algorithms that we, engage with, they are
Mhm.
controlled by a select few companies. So you had, I think, this kind of period where there was like less of that algorithmic control of the platforms, and
Mhm.
there was a real like kind of open market for information. But
Mhm.
now we're seeing a shift to a new type of like market control, and one that I think is a little bit more dangerous in certain ways than the previous one.
100%. And I want to note to the audience and to listeners is like that's why it's really important at SMC that we track and externally, if you're a community member, you track things like the cases in Los Angeles and New
Yeah.
Mexico and the Kentucky, I think it's Kentucky, the school district that's suing. Like there are so many things that are moving, and then regulation that's moving. Again, that might take a much longer time. But again, we really need to, I think, pay attention to these different streams and avenues where we're seeing the attempts to hold those companies that control the algorithms accountable. Because to your point, like it is worrisome that you have a select few that have control over basically what digital diet is being fed to our generation and many others. And I think it's important to note too, I forget the exact stats, but like the overwhelming majority of Gen Z gets their news not from like reading the New York Times, by going online, by going on Instagram, by going on TikTok. So like that adds another complicated layer if that's your main source of information. And again, if you're unable to differentiate in the age of AI between myths and disinformation, deepfakes, things like that. So it's very complicated. So I'm glad that we've got a great mind like yours entering college and going to jump on this. Let's pivot for a second and correct me if I'm mispronouncing this. You're the co-founder, is it of Govy? Is that the name of
Oh,
it?
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. An organization that builds civic technology solutions for governments and its citizens. So, what's, in your opinion, broken about how young people currently access civic information? And walk us kind of through why you even created this in the first place.
Yeah, I think in terms of civic information, like you were talking about, we get a lot of it through these types of social media sources, right? And that's if it exists, right? But
Hmm.
but I think we process a lot of our media diet through potentially, misinformation and disinformation channels, and
Hmm.
also through sources that carry bias, right? And that don't have the fact checking that a lot of traditional media has kind of ingrained in it. And I noticed that in, my friends in high school, my peers across different spaces, even people who are fairly involved in
Hmm.
civic movements, who are civically engaged like traditionally, a lot of our information sources come from biased places,
Yep.
and they come from streams that we just kind of wind up engaging with, right? But it's not very deliberate. And so I kind of felt this like in my team at Govy, right? One of my team members who I would consider fairly engaged civically, at least at like the national level, he didn't know about a scandal where our mayor was about to get recalled,
Hmm.
like in our municipality, right? Like that wasn't information that was available to him. And it's because there's such a disconnect from the traditional sources which this information is carried on, radio, local newspapers that are like hidden on a like a Weebly website, right, that nobody reads. And that really doesn't connect to young people. It doesn't reach young people at all, even if they're interested.
Hmm.
And so the idea with Govy was to aggregate information in a way that ensures that citizens kind of have access in a centralized spot to information that is verified, that is non-biased. And most of it are things like electoral information, right, and
Yeah.
legislative information to allow people, especially at the local level, to find out more and to make informed decisions, whether in direct dialogue with their representatives or in the process of choosing their representatives.
100%. And I love the how you kind of frame that, which is it's all about making informed decisions, right? It's like how can we in the digital age take advantage of this new technology that we have and technology that's being created by wonderful people like yourselves, and how can we allow individuals to just feel better about the decisions that are being made and also the decisions that they're making to put in place those decision makers. So I think that that's just great that you created that, and I think it shows that, technology can be used in such pro-social ways.
Yeah,
It just depends what actors are the ones creating it. Um,
exactly.
so the next question, and then we have two more. If you could redesign one major platform feature tomorrow, I'll even today, to improve civic understanding, what would that be? Or what, and kind of zooming out to make that like a more broad question, just what would you want to see improved in the digital era, that in the digital diets consumed by young people today? I know we've kind of touched upon it, but anything in particular?
Yeah, I think I mean it's a very big thing, but we have social media that is way less algorithmically influenced.
Hmm.
Um, and I think having social media designed in a way for political content where it showcases things that you disagree with.
Yep.
And it's not just an echo chamber. It's not just, I want to keep hearing things that back up my viewpoint. Because I've even experienced that I develop a viewpoint because I see it a lot on my social media and it reinforces this idea that I should believe it. And so I think in developing algorithms, especially for political content, but for a lot of things where we become way more divided because we have these algorithms that drive us towards what our
Hmm.
opinion is at one point in time. If we see a variety of content, and we might hate it, we might disagree with it vehemently, but at least caused us to think about
Oh
our
yeah.
policy views, our views about the world in general, and diversify our understanding of it. And so I think it's like a major change in how algorithms would be processed. But I think because even across other age groups, right? Even across older age groups, we see like a lot of use of Facebook instead of Instagram and TikTok, right? There's a different platform in that place, but it's still taking up a lot of our media diet. And so I think a change like that would really allow people to be exposed and challenged in their political views, and I think could potentially have some significantly beneficial impacts.
100%. I think exposure and challenging people is how you develop your own opinions and values. So it's like that's how
Yeah,
you become a human being. And I think that this frictionless experience that is social media, while it might be, cognitively nice in the sense that, we can passively just scroll and we can
yeah,
not feel challenged at all, it's not developing us as human beings or developing culture further. And I think that civically, I forget the name of the newsletter. It might be called like Ground News.
yeah,
I have a news aggregator and one in the morning that shows me like from the far right, from the far left, and here's
yeah,
where.
yeah, yeah,
So it's like again, I don't want to read all of the articles on either side any day of the week, but it is a great way to develop the way that you're thinking and the way that you're making informed decisions. So
yeah,
completely agree. I think that it would be a different experience for the algorithm, but for any young person listening out there, let's try to create something like that and make it go viral. The last question I have for you is kind of forward thinking. So you've been selected for programs like iCivics Fellowship, and the crown jewel, the Jefferson Scholarship. Again, everyone who doesn't know me well, I'm a huge UVA fan, so super excited about that. So, I'm curious on what you are most excited about pursuing in this next chapter of your advocacy. What are you thinking about? How are you excited to, use the opportunities at UVA and beyond? Talk us through what excites you right now, because I think oftentimes in SMC it can be a little techno pessimistic, like AI
yeah.
is scary, social media and its impact on young people can be really hard. Give us a little bit of hope.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's there are a lot of things to be pessimistic about, but I think that also to me presents a lot of different challenges that I want to be thinking about how to solve. And so
Hmm.
it's kind of I feel like I have in a certain way like this open slate ahead of me, right?
Hmm.
And going into college with the support of something like the Jefferson Scholarship, which is like both financial and in terms of staff and in terms of community, is really exciting. I think UVA in particular really invests a lot into these ideas of open dialogue, of
Hmm.
democracy building, and I think that it's a great launching pad also because as public universities go, it's a fairly ideologically diverse community.
Yep.
And so I think the ability to kind of have many tests of different civic solutions is really exciting there.
Hmm.
And just talking to my peers who I've met through the Jefferson Scholarship process, and who are going to UVA and other great institutions, there is this energy that is wants to be directed in a positive way in making a significant change. And so I think I'm very excited because I think we have a lot of challenges, but we have the right tools, I think, to at least try to fix them. And we have the support financially, and in terms of community and the energy to approach them.
Yep.
And so I've been talking to a lot of mentors who are putting me in contact with people at UVA who are working on these issues on the academic side. And I think being able to bring that perspective of like of action in my community and on a national scale to that environment to then try to work together to achieve some of these goals of attacking these big problems.
Absolutely. And I say this and I truly mean it. Like I know that this is an ongoing conversation with you and there's still so much that you have and are going to do, but we are at SMC so ecstatic that you're a part of the community and that you're thinking critically about things like this and about how social media is impacting democracy and that you're working just in general to strengthen democracy around the world. Super grateful for you. Super jealous that UVA is going to get you for 4 years. Wahoo wah. And just really grateful that you joined us in conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate the
So,
opportunity.
everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to, again, be in conversation with you again next week and super grateful for all of you for listening. So, thank you.